And so our next question is going to be more about, say I'm a layperson and I don't want to have to read the Bible from cover to cover or the Quran from cover to cover or whichever religion is mine. I don't want to have to study for years and years and years. Are there examples and ways to understand what might be miraculous events in other lights, like in the Bible and such, like with the pillar of fire that guided
Sure.
the Israelites for 40 years?
That's a great question, Dwayne. I think there are lots of ways to understand what people might call the supernatural that shows up in these various texts, texts that supposedly represent real experiences of real people. That's the first thing that's really important to acknowledge. But which get interpreted in very exclusive terms that point to the authority of a particular prophet or the truthfulness of a particular tradition to the exclusion of others. I think that's in part what you're trying to get at. But you're also, in your question, pushing already for the sense that these experiences of what people would call the supernatural are much broader than any one particular tradition. And I think you're right. These experiences are what some would call supernatural. That's not how I would understand them, but are universal. They happen all over the world. And I think what's important for me is that I actually want to consider those seriously. I don't want just offhand to dismiss them as folly or fables. I do think fantastic things happen in the world that get coded in religious terms and religious language and symbols because they're beyond our experience and language. We don't have the linguistic capability to assign terms to things when we don't know what they are, we don't know what they mean. And I simply want to suggest that I take people seriously initially. And again, these aren't just sacred texts, but even present experiences. When people claim to have had extraordinary experiences, I want to bracket disbelief phenomenologically, right? And I want my posture to be one that takes seriously, that is open to the possibility that something real is going on in the world that isn't tied to a particular or exclusive doctrinal orientation or religious tradition. So for me, it's not hard to believe that some of the things in the Bible that you and I have been discussing that get cast as miracles or a response to the supernatural actually happened if we don't take the language of the supernatural or the miraculous so literally. If we instead look at the language as symbolic, as trying to describe and explain something totally extraordinary that was outside regular everyday experience that actually happened to human beings in this world that we still don't understand, that is fantastic and defies sometimes our cause and effect logic. And if we take them seriously, that they may be pointing to a similar reality that even scientists are trying to get at right now about the nature of reality, how reality actually is multidimensional and fantastic and isn't necessarily cause and effect, that there might be some non-material or consciousness at work here. In other words, then, what if we looked at these miracles as a response to something in the world that just signals that the material way we've been looking at the world is inadequate, that something more is going on here, and that if we didn't downgrade people in these religious traditions for engaging in folly, but instead took them seriously and took the limitation of language seriously. What do you name something, Dwayne, that you can't explain, that you've never experienced? That's totally of a different order than everyday experience. And if we took that seriously and said, as symbolic language that describes something they experienced, that it may point to something real about the nature of the world that we're just now trying to understand. That's where I want to go with the whole idea of the supernatural, that there may not be anything supernatural about it at all, that it may just be pointing to something real about the world that we're just now figuring out, that maybe our materialist models don't help us get there, and that there is more to this world than what they can help to explain.
Now, if I could interject, while you were talking, I remembered as a teenager, my pastor would talk about Revelations, the Revelations of St. John every now and then. And he would speak sort of like that, my pastor. And he would say, hey, if you were 2,000 years ago and you saw a war with huge tanks and fighter jets and stuff, what words could you use other than maybe chariots or like a
That's right.
scorpion's tail or the faces of men or in these giant creatures?
Correct. And so in some ways, what you're pointing to is I'm not just critical of religion, because in many ways I am critical of religion. Religion cast as sort of this exclusive truths of particular people and particular group can be very dangerous and often is and can be violent as well, especially when we're talking about these institutional forms. But I'm also, and you're probably hearing me be very sympathetic, just like how you described your pastor, to people's experience as possibly pointing to something real. In other words, I'm open to the possibility that these are real experiences that were so other that they were ineffable, that we just didn't have the language, or humans didn't have the language to describe them. And again, so they went to the fantastic, these images that were part of their own lexicon, of their own cultural index to point to as something that can help understand a transcendent experience that may have been very real. So that the literal doesn't really get us there, but in some cases it's metaphorical for something that's ineffable, that might actually point to something real about the nature of the world.